on climate resilience. I think we all know that climate impacts are here. We're seeing them around the world, and we are in need of climate solutions at scale. It's really critical that these solutions are implemented at the local level and in partnership with the federal government and the private sector if we're truly going to accomplish all we need to in this space. So we have a fantastic panel today with each of those perspectives. I'm going to introduce our panel, and I'll have some questions for them, but we'll also give you all a chance to ask some questions at the end. So please go ahead and save up your questions for our panelists. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Kimberly Dowdell. Kimberly is the 2024 president of the American Institute for Architects. Next to Kimberly is Timothy Keller. Mayor Tim Keller is the mayor of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And next to Tim on the end, we have Victoria Salinas from FEMA, from the federal government. So we are going to go ahead and start off with welcoming our panelists and asking some questions to get us started, and with some opening remarks from each of our panelists. So we have one microphone, so please be patient as I pass it down the aisle. Mayor Keller, would you like to start?
Well, it's wonderful to be on this panel, so thank you so much for including the little city of Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's actually the 23rd largest city in America, but I realize on a global scale, only anyone remembers us from Breaking Bad. So some of our viewers will understand that. Now, I think I would just open with a couple of thoughts. First and foremost, of course, we're in the desert, and so very much the challenges we have are associated with climate change and, of course, with water and the associated scarcity. And I'll just tell you a quick story. You know, when I was a kid, we used to have a ski area right next to Albuquerque, and it snowed all the time, and I got to ski. And now we don't have that. These are like, you know, very frivolous examples of the climate change that we all know that is real and all around us. But for us, it also comes in different forced deforestation ways. So we have a specific type of tree that is all over New Mexico. It's called a pinon tree. It's something that we actually use in our cooking and so forth. It is being eaten and destroyed by something called the bark beetle. All of that is because of climate change, because it doesn't freeze as much. And so now we have less of those trees, which means when it rains, we now have mudslides, which we never had before. And we have had 1,000% increase in forest fires, which of course also leads to then, you know, challenges when it rains. So look, we've all heard this story. I just want to let you know how that plays out in Albuquerque, New Mexico as well. So what we're trying to do as a city is, first and foremost, we recognize that there are really no boundaries when it comes to the challenges with respect to climate change and, of course, with carbon. And for us, we're in a valley, which is a very important, if you want to think about sort of the dynamics of air quality in a valley. This is something that we struggle with and deal with, and I'll talk a little bit about more of that later. But what we're trying to do is basically say that it is incumbent, I believe, on local governments, especially for us. We're the only large city in about 1,000 square miles. So we are the #1 producer of all of these dangerous gases and chemicals, just by default. And so therefore, right, we have that responsibility to do something about it, and hopefully also to have some impact. Because again, we're the only large city in 1,000 square miles. So we're basically looking at 5 things, and I'll just touch on them briefly. We're trying to be 100% renewable powered. So that has to do with investments in solar farms, has to do with building efficiency, all of the things that we talk about. But we also are trying to reduce our heat island effect. Our temperatures have gone up as much as 17 degrees Fahrenheit. And that is basically because we cut down all our trees to save water when I was sort of in high school in the 90s. And so now we're actually replanting trees because it turns out we just need the right kind of tree that doesn't take as much water. All of this is related to our snowpack because that's where we get the drinking water in the Rio Grande Valley. And so decreasing that temperature also means snow lasts longer, which means we have more drinking water, and the water can then also feed agricultural crops around us. So then there's a component around food waste that we also are definitely looking at, again, because we're the largest food waste producer in 1,000 square miles. And so for us, these are some of the components we're trying to put together. And the last one is electrification. And so we have a series of subsidies for all sorts of, you name the heat pump and those type of things, double pane windows and so forth. But we have found we are, for American standards, we're a very old community. We're 300 years old. and we have a housing and a construction methodology that doesn't really incorporate a lot of that. And so we're trying to really retrofit essentially the entire city. And so we're trying to be, as a city, LEED Silver, something we've learned from our architect friends. And we're also trying to make sure that we have the most solar panels per capita of any city, per capita, in America, which we're number 4. So we're the 4th solar city in America. So these are some of the things that we're working on to try and cope with some of these issues. And I'll close with this. At least for cities in our situation that are isolated in rural areas, I just want to emphasize that there is, I think, hope in local governments, state governments, city governments, no matter what is happening in DC with policy, and we have some amazing policymakers now, but just knowing that in the future, at least in America, I can say that many, many cities and states all over the United States of America are committed to doing what we can for climate change, no matter who is in the White House.
Excellent. Really important. All right, we're working again. 1 second. They want me to walk somewhere, but I don't know where. This way? Okay. If I stand over here, does it work? Excellent. All right. Thank you. You can tell I was never very good at theater. I don't know all the backstage commands. All right, so what I was trying to say is that the local leadership is absolutely critical. My home agency, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, has a memorandum of understanding that we just signed with more than 700 climate mayors across the United States who are committed to climate action, and it's inspiring to see the amount of work being done across the United States. So really appreciate what mayors are doing on this. Now I'd like to turn it over to Kimberly to hear more from about the
Do I need to stand there too? Can everyone hear me? Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be here. It's great to share this panel with leaders. So my name is Kimberly Dowdell, and I'm the 100th president of the American Institute of Architects. The AIA has a mission to empower and inspire architects to improve society and transform the world. And we have 2 key strategic priorities. One is climate action, and the other is equity. So we're here at COP29, and we've been coming to COP for the last few years to really elevate the role that architects are playing. I mean, we actually already play a pretty significant role in the work to advance climate action, but we need to really raise awareness. And so I'm going to talk very briefly about 3 specific things that we're hoping to accomplish. 1, raise awareness. 2, raise accountability. And 3, take action. So in terms of the awareness piece, one of the questions that I have gotten a number of times since I've been here, and this is my first COP, by the way. It's been a wonderful experience so far, but when I say I'm an architect, people are like, oh, why are you here? And so I, of course, immediately say that, buildings actually contribute 40% of our emissions, and so architects play a pretty significant role in, in the challenges that we're looking to overcome. So that's part of it. But also making sure that, and this goes beyond COP. So of course, increasing awareness here at COP, but also within the broader public, and helping our clients to better understand, the role that they're playing in either the problem or the solution. Also, I should mention I have a day job. So I'm a AI president. It's a 1-year term. My day job is with a global firm called HOK, which is actually famous for designing the flame towers here in Baku. So excited to see that iconic project up close and personal. But back to the work that generally architects do, part of our role is to serve as the voice of architects, and again, create awareness around the value that we provide and the work that we're doing specifically related to climate action. Accountability is sort of the next theme I'll talk about briefly. So AIA has a number of initiatives that we are, really championing to help create more of a quantitative understanding of our impact. And so we have our AI 2030 commitment, which is essentially helping our members work toward a zero carbon impact by 2030. And so providing lots of research and resources to our members to help achieve that goal. At this point, we have over 1,300 firms throughout throughout our membership who have signed on to this commitment, and so we're constantly again providing resources and the technical expertise that they need to go forward with their projects to make sure that they're having the impact that we need them to have. We also have our architecture and design materials pledge, which again helps to provide accountability around the types of materials that are leveraged in our building projects, which again all kind of counts toward our total impact. And so we have a number of different things that we're doing to measure our impact, and there's the famous saying that you can't manage what you don't measure, and so we're really intentional about helping our architects look at the impact of their projects and really moving the needle on our climate action work. And then the last piece is action, taking action. Part of us being here is in service to that, but also we have an initiative that we're calling the Chief Architect Initiative to actually help work directly with mayors and other leaders to have architects serve as a key advisor to the mayor or city manager or others in leadership at different levels to look at issues around climate action, affordable housing, whatever issues are particularly challenging for a city, thinking about the built environment with the leadership of an architect. In fact, our AI CEO sitting right here, Lakeisha Woods, her saying is that architects are your partners for progress, and so we actually have a partnership with the U.S. Conference of Mayors to promote the work that we can do in partnership with mayors and other leaders to again help move the needle on climate action. So at a high level, those are some of the things that we're working on, and I think it's so important that we work with our state and local leaders as well as our national leaders, and obviously we acknowledge that there's been a change in the administration at the national level, and so we have to really double down on our efforts to make sure that at the subnational level we're really continuing to build momentum. So the AI is the largest design organization in the world. We have over 200 chapters, primarily in the U.S., but increasingly globally, and we're actually providing a lot of technical expertise to our members who are in the global south and just really all over the world. I spent a little bit of time in Nigeria and Kenya over the summer visiting with members there, and they asked about some of the things that we're doing at AIA that they can sort of start to take to their local context. And so we're trying to take what we've learned in the U.S. and kind of port that around the world, and just again work with as many partners as we can to move forward the climate action agenda, which is really critical to our organization. So leave it there. Thank you.
Excellent. And I think that it's really important to note that, within the U.S., the bipartisan infrastructure law is investing catalyzing billions and trillions of dollars of infrastructure investment, and it's happening around the world too. And so the infrastructure we build today needs to withstand the climate of tomorrow. And so the work you're doing right now is absolutely critical and timely at this really important point of investment. So thank you so much for your leadership on that. Now I want to turn it over to my colleague from FEMA, Victoria, to talk about the work that they're doing.
Thank you so much, and wonderful to be with all of you. So FEMA is the Emergency Management, Disaster Management Agency of the United States, and oftentimes when people think about disaster management, they think about the disaster that just happened, the response phase, the rebuilding phase. But FEMA, as well as many other agencies like ours, are committed to breaking the cycle of disaster suffering, both the loss and the human suffering that disasters cause. And so resilience building is a key focus area for us and a key component of our mission. And during this administration, one of the things that we've really been able to move forward are a number of things. Both the bipartisan infrastructure law has certainly led to new resources for communities, but one of the most important things is actually the power of prioritization. We are looking to have a nation that's resilient for all. And so getting to that all piece means that we have to prioritize together. Even in Albuquerque, I'm sure there's certain neighborhoods that are more resource constrained and underserved. Just like in our nation, there are certain communities that are more resource constrained, capacity constrained, and disadvantaged and underserved. And so that confluence of disaster risk, much of it created by federal laws of the past, like redlining, and disaster risk is what we've been prioritizing through a bipartisan law called the Community Disaster Resilience Zone law. And community disaster resilient zones are exactly that. Using data, we've identified those places that are most at risk and in need. And we started with states and several hundred designations at the state level, and then this fall have completed the first round of designations for tribal nations and territories, bringing us up to nearly 750 resilient zones around the country. And why that matters from an action perspective is that it really enables people to partner together differently. And so in the Southeast, for example, in the first tranche of resilient zones, we saw philanthropy step in. Walmart Foundation, for example, pulled together different organizations in the Southeast and started to fund community navigators to help some of these communities access the full range of federal resources and other resources needed to invest in resilience. We're seeing that focus also unlock programs across the federal government. NOAA has several that have also prioritized these resilient zones. But it goes deeper than that, because really what we're trying to achieve in order to have that resilient nation for all is a lot of what Mayor Tim talked about. We wish all mayors were looking at their issues the way you are, because it starts with that deep understanding of risk, the nuanced risk that one faces, both in the short and the long term. And it's oftentimes surprising what one will find when they actually look at the climate projections. We've invested with the AT&T and Argonne National Lab in the Climate Risk and Resilience Portal that provides downscaled climate data for a number of hazards. And recently, the State Emergency Management Director for Idaho, for example, brought up an issue you brought up. That was, he had never, when he did this work with AT&T and looked at their climate data for the rest of the century, all of a sudden he realized that drought was going to be an issue Idaho was facing because of the fact they were going to be warmer, and so their snowpack was going to be less. And so that let him know that now in 2024 he could start tackling drought at a state level so that it would have the consequences that otherwise not paying attention to it, because it's not a historic risk, would have for the communities across the state. So understanding risk and really leveling that up is something that we've been tremendously focused on across the federal government and at FEMA. Reducing risk is another piece there, both through the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, and a number of regular investments. We have really been focused on helping communities tackle risk, but no longer one peril at a time. And I think that's the pivot point here, is that it's not good enough to just have a project focused on flood risk reduction, because most communities don't just flood. And so we're seeing more communities, and this is where the design community is so powerful, really have that community conversation about what are the hazards, shocks, stresses they face, and how do they design for the community well-being and the community's true resilience. And so Oneida Nation in New York is one example that got funding from us through the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, where not only did they put in a microgrid and battery storage for their community center that doubles as a shelter, it's also next to their medical campus, so that when there's power outages or storms, their medical campus and those critical facilities that serve their nation are an energy island. And so it's that holistic thinking that we're seeing happen more and more, and which is really core to the concept of resilience itself. And so I think those are a number of the things that we're looking at in terms of really prioritizing, helping look at multi-hazard, multi-threat risk reduction, and also making sure that people are preparing for all of the different threats and hazards they face, given that we're no longer, we don't have the luxury of doing things one hazard at a time.
I really appreciate what you just said, Victoria, about that sort of compounding, cascading hazards and impacts piece. You know, at NOAA, with our Climate Ready Nation initiative, we're looking at droughts, we're looking at floods, we're looking at heat waves, we're looking at storms, we're looking at sea level rise, we're looking at wildfire, right? But many of these communities are facing all of these things together, and it can be completely overwhelming. And we know that in order to move forward, collaboration is going to absolutely be key to helping people to prepare for these risks, as well as to recover from them after they respond. So I'd love to ask each of you, if you're willing, to tell us a little bit about the challenges you're seeing with respect to collaboration across sectors, across different issues, and sort of what solutions you see out there for making this collaboration happen so that we can be supporting decision makers on the ground. Who wants to tackle that first?
Well, I think first thing about our collaboration is that there is certainly an acknowledgement of like the region that you're in, right? So for us, there is a city and a state and a county, and there's tribal governments all around us, and there's all sorts of other entities in between. So we do have a alphabet soup of different organizations that try and coordinate all of these things together, and that is, I think, helpful to a certain extent. I actually find what has been more helpful is when an outside party is actually the convener to kind of mitigate some of those governing interests that appear when you have elected officials involved, basically. And so what happens is we actually get somebody like the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the work with AAI. They convene all sorts of different programs that we tap into, and we all kind of agree on it because it wasn't decided by one politician or another. And conversely, then there is sort of strength in kindred spirits. So I'm a part of the Climate Mayors program, which is a wonderful organization that organizes mayors around doing what we can around climate change and taps into things like even COP and so forth. So those organizations I think are actually really helpful. And it's also because they outlast the annoying term of an elected official, right? So some elected officials are around for a long time, some are not. So you have to have institutions that are bringing that entity together. And so I think it's a little bit counterintuitive. It's the last thing you want is an elected leader bringing everyone together because they may or may not be there. And then, quickly politics becomes involved. So that's sort of one thought on collaboration. I'd mention one other one, which is also just to set a goal or a policy that then everyone can buy into. So we're a J40 city, which is the Justice 40 program. That's a strong equity program about where you spend your money. And it basically says that 40% of your capital has to go to the intersection of dealing with inequities, communities that have suffered for a long time, and climate change. And so we do that now as a city with our capital bond investment program. But it's something actually it's sort of like a climate accord. Like you can just commit to being a J40 blank government. So a state can do it, a city can do it. And of course we copied it actually from the administration. The Biden administration has done this. They've tried to do this across all agencies. And so you can do it at different levels, but that helps clarify things. When there's a choice, when it comes to where we're spending our money, we know 40% has got to go to the intersection between dealing with inequity and climate change.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we see just in trying to advance this work generally is sort of people trying to work in silos. And so one of the the things that I try to recommend wherever I go for whoever will listen is to think about tri-sector collaboration. So the public sector, the private sector, and the philanthropic sector, really collaborating to solve some of our most pressing issues. Obviously, climate action being the topic here. A project that comes to mind, a building project. My hometown, which is Detroit, Michigan, we have an old train station that actually closed in 1988, and it sort of was a symbol of Detroit's decay and disinvestment for decades. And Ford Motor Company actually purchased that property around 2015, 2016, and invested $1 billion into restoring it. And there's the famous saying that the most sustainable building is the one that already exists, and so it's a great story. It's a great comeback story, not just for the city, but obviously the building itself was restored to a really great extent, and that wouldn't have been possible were it not for the private sector stepping in. But of course, there are philanthropic partners and working closely with the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan to make that particular project happen. So we need those kinds of things to happen, on the broader scale to really, move the needle on a lot of the issues that we're talking about relative to climate.
So I'll lift up three different things. I think when it comes to collaboration, what we have seen historically is that in the resilience space, there's been a lack of a governance structure. And what I mean by that, when you think disaster response, you what comes to mind as well for many people is that unity of action, where people know their roles, they know what to do, they know how to work together really well. When it's come to when it comes to building a more resilient community, there's so many sectors, there's so many partners that's one of those things that there's been a lot of inefficiencies in the collaborations that occur. A lot of good effort, but a lot of inefficiencies. And so this past year, one of the things we worked on and published with a lot of stakeholder input was a national resilience guidance that really boils down what those different roles are that a community needs to have in place in order to really push resilience building forward. And it doesn't say that one entity should own it all, but it does say that you need a lead coordinator. You need somebody who's responsible for connecting the dots, bringing the people, setting the table. And so that's one thing that I would lift up for folks is the National Resilience Guidance, because it really is an important starting point for harnessing the power of collaboration and really stopping with kind of what we have right now is this massive leakage of energy. Like even at COP, you feel the energy of all the intention, but we don't yet see the commensurate results on the ground. And so a governance framework, coordination framework is really important to keep that going from the local level up. Secondly, I wanted to talk about money. As Amanda said, in the United States, we have had historic levels of funding. I think one of the things that I fear is that people will think, and as an administration official, I'm a political appointee, we have certainly been highlighting that we had historic funding, but that cannot be the high watermark for because the problems are too big. Rather, it needs to be a springboard, and not only a springboard for more federal funding to address these issues, but also for all sectors to really invest differently. And this is where I think we need a shift when it comes to collaboration to funding things optimally. We are guilty in the federal government, FEMA included, of funding good projects, but perhaps not the optimal projects. And I'm going to say something you might find a little controversial here. But for instance, you have bonding capacity in Albuquerque, right? When I was in an Alaskan Native village this summer, there's no bonding capacity, right? And so in terms of the federal grants, which are government taxpayer subsidies, when we think about building a resilient nation for all, how we help Albuquerque unlock more money and how we help an Alaskan Native village invest in their resilience looks different. But right now, if you apply to a grant for us and it's a good and it meets our criteria and it's competitive, we'll just give you the money because it was the most competitive project. It wasn't necessarily the most optimal use of a super scarce resource, which is a government subsidy. And so as we look at the rest of the next couple decades and really think about the different sources of capital, if anyone's been to any of these other sessions about unlocking adaptation and resilience capital, there's massive conversations underway, and government taxpayer dollars is one part of a capital stack. And I think it's gonna require different kind of collaboration when it comes to funding the massive amounts of resilience so that the public sector dollars help bigger cities, medium cities unlock other things and help those rural indigenous communities with no or very low financial capacity also have a more resilient future. And then I think the last thing I would mention is also equipping our workforce with the right skills to leverage the authorities and opportunities in front of us. And due to the Inflation Reduction Act at FEMA, for example, we have the ability now to pay for more low-embodied carbon materials in all of our projects, pay for more net zero project and energy elements, energy building processes in projects. But because we fund because we fund what is submitted by local governments and state governments, we fund what is demanded. And people oftentimes may not know that they should be envisioning the project with low embodied carbon materials and that the government would fund it. And so that's both our own workforce, but also the partnerships, again, going to collaboration. So many other sectors are constantly thinking about the building materials that need to be used, the design approaches that are better. And so that's one of those areas where I think deeper collaboration is certainly needed to accelerate the usage of the authorities and the programs that permit these things that lead to both risk reduction and climate mitigation.
Excellent. I want to pick up on a thread that came up through those remarks, sort of the inequities around resilience in particular. We know that adaptation solutions can produce huge returns on investment, anywhere from $2 for every $1 invested up to 30 for some of the solutions. But you have to have those resources up front to get into the game. So I'm curious about the approaches you're taking to address inequities through resilience and ensure that resilience planning approaches, access to resources, is meeting the communities and sub-communities, the constituencies that are maybe the most vulnerable, the most under-resourced, and as we like to say, underserved, because often it's us as the NOAA, the federal government, who is not providing the service. So we recognize we have a role in this of underserving. And it sometimes does go back to resources, like you said, but I think that there are approaches that we can take, and there are some really great examples out there. So any thoughts that you have on sort of the inequities around resilience planning and what you're doing about it that you'd like to pinpoint?
Well, one of the things that we're doing with AIA is, we're equipping our members. So we have 100,000 members across, again, mostly the U.S., but increasingly globally. But in the U.S. context, our individual chapters are, really they're the ones on the ground at the local level working with, the local government and the communities directly. I think it's so important for community engagement to be a part of the conversation about the evolution of the built environment. But I also think about disaster response, and so we actually have a program to actually train architects to go into a community that has just experienced a natural disaster to assess the structures of the properties that have been damaged, to determine whether or not they are fit to be reoccupied. An example of that, we visited Maui this summer, almost a year after the Lahaina wildfire disaster. And we met with the mayor there, and I'd actually seen him just a couple weeks before at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and he talked about the importance, or he reflected on my remarks about the importance of the design community. And, we really got the sense that, and we're really proud of our AI Hawaii and AI Maui members who really sort of stood in the gap, and they kind of went in right after the disaster to do those assessments, but then also to help mobilize emergency housing and all the things that were required to help get people settled in after such a devastating event. But we're really proud that the mayor had hired a new senior level official who was actually both an architect and an attorney to help think through and think through the solutions, but also work with our community of architects to engage the community. So I think it's so important to be really mindful of where the resources are needed the most, and to really work again with the sort of tri-sector approach, the public sector, private sector, and the philanthropic sector to fill in.
Well, three examples I think come to mind. The first one for us is we're looking at, we do a lot around air quality. So under the EPA regulations, when you're a large city in a rural area, you're actually the sort of administrator for air quality rules. And so what we're doing is actually health equity impact assessment and regulation, where we're taking 20% of our most vulnerable communities, and we're basically saying that they should not have incremental air permits for greenhouse gases. And so this happens to correspond, as you would expect, with our most disadvantaged communities that have been taken advantage of before with a bunch of industries and paving companies and asphalt mixers and things like this all throughout the Rio Grande Valley. So for us, this first step is to know where these communities are and exactly what the inequity is. In this case, it is actually about rates of cancer, rates of asthma, things of this nature, rates of diabetes. So we're able to literally, put their sort of, it's like the opposite, like it's like a no-fly zone, like it's a no permit zone there to try and reduce those impacts. They happen to also be in the bottom of the valley. So, the sort of particulates end up gravitating towards the bottom. So this is also helping, because if you're polluting at the bottom of a valley, it just stays there. So this is one example that we're using. But it does come down to knowing where these communities are. So in another one, we're taking all our, we have bonds, speaking of financing, where actually private companies mostly like HVAC companies, they will do conversions for energy efficiency, and they'll do it for free, but then they actually they pay themselves off by the savings you get on your electricity bill. So this is enabled by a state law, which is awesome. And so we're using this now as a way both for government entities, but in some cases institutions or businesses, to get free retrofits, and then they pay it off over time through that energy savings. They're called energy savings bonds. Institutionally, there is a Native American tribe near us. It's actually not really near us. It's like 150 miles away, the Hickory Apache Nation. And we gave them, essentially, we borrowed, all right, I'm getting some help here. Get up here. Okay, nice. All right, we did that great. Little pro tip. Okay, so think of Albuquerque, New Mexico. We've got the Hickory Apache Nation 100 miles away. We lent them our bond capacity. So to your point, cities and governments, whoever can bond, can give that to other people. It's just a question of like the financial mechanism. So we lent them our bonding capacity to build a 50, I think it's megawatt solar farm, and the city power comes from them, right? So we bonded with them to actually do our own power. And so that covers about 80% of the power for the city of Albuquerque. So anyway, there's a three-way partnership with our utility too, which is critical in that way. But those are some of the ways now we were sort of lifting up them using that tool that we had.
I feel like I want to move to Albuquerque now. You guys are doing so many amazing things. So I want to go back to actually Justice 40 that you mentioned, which for those of you who are not familiar, has been the Biden-Harris approach of really making sure that dollars, 40%, at least 40% of dollars are going to the most underserved, disadvantaged communities. And why that's been really powerful is that we're seeing systemic change when it comes to addressing deep issues of inequity. And I'll give the example of a neighborhood in Philadelphia, Eastwick, which is one of the neighborhoods that is the lowest lying communities in the city, impacted by redlining. Impacted by, maybe the root cause is a battery or something. No. And so Eastwick is a neighborhood that has been impacted by redlining, flooding, all kinds of different issues. It had the trifecta. It's near the airport. It was near a dump site. It was near all of these different things, and also a predominantly African American community that had also experienced all kinds of economic challenges. And so what we've been able to see in even the last 3 years is different programs come together in a beautiful way. We've had EPA both remediate and cover that landfill so it's no longer causing issues in the neighborhood, and they also did some planting of trees and reforestation and widening of the creek, so some nature-based solutions. We have FEMA through our Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, providing direct technical assistance for holistic resilience planning that then also resulted in a grant from us to put in a temporary flood wall while the Army Corps of Engineers puts in a more permanent solution. NOAA actually funded the city to provide capacity building support to the community, so the sustainability director had a person that was working in the neighborhood. And so all of these different things coming together, so now these residents are actually going to have an opportunity to have less flood risk in their community. They're going to have an early warning system that's specific to their neighborhood, so that the older residents, because it is a community that's also been aging, don't have to walk down to the river to see if the floodwaters are rising, because they'll get the messaging in a much more direct way. And so we're seeing these examples of where there's been systemic discrimination start to turn because of the focus on those communities and helping those communities, not just with one project, but the suite of things needed to address their specific resilience challenges, which also goes to what Tim was saying about understanding what's driving the inequities, so that the work and the support to those communities is addressing the actual root causes of issues that people are facing. So it's been great to see both in Eastwick, places like Crisfield, Maryland, just the number of places where that focus and that accountability that Justice 40 has created is actually starting to make a difference.
Excellent. All right. So what I want to do now is ask you each one question specific to your area of expertise, and then we'll come back around as a group again. But I'm going to come right back to you, Victoria. In terms of the work that FEMA is doing, the federal government has made massive public investments through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, through the Inflation Reduction Act. We know that the scale of those investments is unprecedented and at the same time insufficient. So I'd love to hear sort of what you think around the role of other actors within this space. I know Kimberly mentioned this earlier, but I'd love to hear how FEMA is thinking about this.
So the way we're thinking about the role of other actors is that we need to get more specific on how we're all partnering together. And so I mentioned already kind of the governance around that the National Resilience Guidance highlights, but I think for us, we are trying to move to a place where we are part of somebody else's solution. We are not the whole solution. And so again, I'll give a quick example from Seattle. We funded some of the Carnegie libraries there. They came to FEMA for funding for putting in a new HVAC system so they could be cooling options and air filtration for wildfire smoke. And when I showed up at the project to celebrate it, it was actually way more than that. They'd done a seismic retrofit for their bond. They'd done ADA accessibility. They were next to a food pantry that also did hot meals. And so I bring this up because in terms of what everybody should do, it's really understanding we all need to be contributing to helping communities address their risk holistically, and so that we as FEMA are just part of your solution because your solution is so much bigger than one grant, one program.
Excellent. All right. Another key thing we know we need is innovation. Kimberly, architects are absolutely known for this. I'd love to hear about some of the really exciting innovations you're seeing throughout the community.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And Victoria, as you were mentioning I was thinking, oh, you must have some really good architects involved there. So because it's like literally what we do. So the AIA, like we have a resource called AI Framework Design Excellence, and that's something that we encourage all of our members to really think about. Our projects through this lens, and so it talks about all the different ways to think of, to design for recovery and design for water, design for resilience, all the things that that you need to do but it's like all in one place. And so we have great resources on our website to, help guide our members. But we have an awards program through what we call the Committee on the Environment, or COAT. So we have the COAT Top 10 Awards that, really celebrate innovation and really highlight the projects that are being done by our members, primarily in the U.S., but also projects around the world. My firm has won a number of those, and really celebrates the just the creative thinking and problem solving that we desperately need to kind of move the needle on climate. So in terms of specific innovation, there's so many things that it's like my mind is flooded with all the specific things that can be done. But I think what's most important is to to really, and I mentioned this before, but engage with the community, like really help help the community understand that a project is not about what's being done to them, but being done with them. And I think it's so important for the designer, architect, to work closely with the client, with the community, involving the public sector, and to the extent that it's necessary, the philanthropic sector together to best leverage a project to get the most mileage out of it. So the example that you just gave, it's not just about fixing this one issue. It's about how do we understand from the community what their biggest issues are, and then try to stretch it as much as possible. And so architects, having exposure to lots of different projects, can provide that expertise, that creativity to help, really expand the scope, within reason to achieve more goals.
All All right, so in addition to the collaboration and the innovation, we also need to scale what we're doing. And so leaders like Albuquerque are critical. Other cities are probably now tuning in from all around the world and going to be watching this afterwards. We have people in the room here. And as a result, Mayor Keller, I'm curious, can you talk about the way that you interact with other mayors and within that sort of stack of governments that you talked about before, and how that helps to, bring good ideas into Albuquerque, but also get those out to other communities?
Well, the first thing I would just mention is that wonderfully, like any organization, we have an association, is just like the architects do, and I mentioned them before, but the Conference of Mayors really takes the lead on organizing mayors in a lot of different ways. And so they have done some great work actually with a number of partners that are even here around sustainability, and especially around construction. We were kind of joking earlier that mayors play like a very lightweight role of being like the designer of their city, just because you're approving, right, all of these projects. And so you have the opportunity to actually jump in and sort of change them for the better, or for the worse, but you can make them more green, you can make them less green, the whole thing. So, but to your point about scale, I think some of it is also around utilizing what the federal government is offering. So again, the incentive for a city and a county and a state to band together and go after some of the benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act, that really has been a unifying force in New Mexico. And so we see that it's a way where we can all put in, so I'll give you an example. There are two companies that manufacture solar panels in Asia. Now, I know like globally moving from Asia to America doesn't really change much, but as an American, we would love to have solar panels manufactured in America so that number one, it's jobs, but it's also less carbon because of all the transport and everything like that. And it should be, right, because they're solar panels, so it makes sense that we should actually kind of have our own. We don't right now, more or less, as a country. They're all produced elsewhere. So anyway, the Inflation Reduction Act put forth all sorts of different kinds of programs to try and get reshoring done. So in New Mexico, we band together and we actually had two companies take us up on reshoring to Albuquerque in their solar panel manufacturers. So this is ticking off like jobs, it's ticking off reducing the carbon footprint because we would have imported those anyway. And it's also for us, we want to be the renewable hub for solar panel manufacturing in America. And we can actually do this. The only reason why that is even remotely possible is because of the Inflation Reduction Act. Because the city puts in, 10 million, state puts in 50 million, and like the Inflation Reduction Act is adding like anywhere between 300 and 800 million of incentives on top of it. And if you ask the people who run these companies, why are you doing this? They will just tell you it's financial. It makes financial sense for us now to produce in America. The only question is where. So for us, it's a long answer of we've been able to scale in a way that we never thought possible. But it took that sort of federal accelerant to enable us to do that.
Excellent. Well, at this point in time, I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand, and I will walk over with our mic. Hold it at the top, and you will come through more clearly. Actually, I'll hold it. Just I think that's less transfer scariness.
Sure. Pierre Burstein with the Center for Public Impact. We're one of those outside organizations that help de-silo and bridge different departments in government. How do you engage community residents in climate action at the local level? And more importantly, what are the challenges that are most prevalent at the local level in engaging communities towards climate action?
Well, by far the biggest challenge is individual behavior. So whether it is basic things like food waste, or it's recycling, or not using plastic bags, we struggle with this. And I would also say in New Mexico, we have these like traditional stoves that we love. They're called pellet stoves. And, they're terrible when it comes to the environment, but they're a symbol of us, of home, and of being around the hearth, and we don't want to give that up. So I'm just letting you know there are deeply seated, in some cases that actually is somewhat cultural, it's also geographic, but these other aspects are just their personal behavior change. So that's definitely barrier number one for us. And even we have like a renewed littering problem in New Mexico, which is like we thought we fixed that 10 years ago, and now people are just throwing trash out their window again. So there's I don't want to go too far into like what the causes are, what the fixes are for that, but it's been very difficult to return to the notion of like a collective good, a change that we need to make for all of us because it's better for all of us. But right now, it's not really working. I mean, we're actually kind of going the other way, where people are just making more individual decisions. And so that's been number one challenge. Number two challenge is definitely still this problem with home building and cost and renewable energy and or energy efficient appliances. So, we have a series of rebates. We focus them all on low income communities. But I mean, I just got a new air conditioner, and after the fact, I was like, why didn't I get a heat pump? And then it's like, well, because it's way more expensive. And then everyone's like, well, you'll pay for it in 20 years. I mean, no one wants to hear that. Like, I don't want to pay for it in 20 years. So I think there's also a little bit of kind of reckoning with people about how we communicate in real terms. Like, no one is ever going to make the consumer choice that is going to benefit them 20 years later. I mean, some of you will because you're just wonderful people. So some people will. But I think by and large, we just have to recognize that, like, people are a lot more short term than that. And so we have to create a whole series of programs to try and disconnect that short term incentive.
I'll add one thing on that. So I think for us at the federal level, one of the ways we try and really encourage that and support it is actually through our planning requirements. Hazard mitigation planning may be a technical process, but it's one where the guidance for how you do that hazard risk assessments and everything is supposed to involve community members. It's supposed to really lead to those design parameters for what a more resilient community is, and so that's one level. But I do think another area, and this gets to your point about behavior change, one of the things that we've struggled with is that despite education or even calls to action, behavior change is one of the hardest things. Sometimes because people don't want to, but sometimes because people are just busy, right? Like, I'm a professional with 2 kids, trying to keep a marriage alive, and like, it's hard. Life is hard, right? And so having people have to do more is also sometimes a losing battle. So where we've seen success is actually you've got the design parameters, fire safe community, drought tolerant community, and then you see regulations or ordinances at the local level that require the action. So my sister, who lives in El Cerrito, just had her 3rd kid. When I went to visit, I literally had found a gardener to cut her lawn to make sure that she had the right perimeter around her house, because her city was sending her nasty grams and her insurance was sending her nasty grams. But she just had her 3rd kid. But it was the local ordinances that were compelling action. Similarly with building codes and standards, having people, it's not that people don't want to do better, but having someone voluntarily add 12 more things they need to do to be prepared, be protected, reduce the risk is really hard. And so that's where knowing that a community has a vision for what a resilient community is, and then the local government, state governments, federal governments have the standards and codes that can really help get there, in some ways takes the burden, the individual behavior burden off, because we comply when we have to, but that compliance is actually in service of the greater good and even one's own vision for what they want out of their community.
Yeah, I'll just add that this isn't really specifically to community, but in a way it does relate. But building codes, that drives behavior. The way that things are designed, will ultimately help to drive the goals that we've been talking about. But also, like, at the community level, I think, yes, people are busy and overwhelmed, but also I don't know that people fully understand, like, the scope and scale of the problem and how specifically they can contribute to it or why they should contribute to it. My colleagues are going to laugh because I keep bringing up Captain Planet, which only a small sliver of the population even knows about. But Captain Planet famously said, the power is yours, but people don't understand how they can wield their power to help move the needle. So I think we need to get some more, I guess, the updated version of Captain Planet for kids to really start to understand their responsibility, but then also, at least, again, speaking from the architecture perspective, making sure that our schools of architecture are really taking, this technical content seriously and ensuring that students are are equipped to do this work. And of course, AI, we have to do our part to, make sure that our research and our resources for our members, is up to date and really kind of at the cutting edge, so that we can work directly with our clients. And actually, that's another issue. Our clients don't always understand why they need to spend X amount more to achieve these goals, because they're like, but what about my pro forma? And so we have to really increase awareness of the climate crisis, frankly, that we're dealing with right now.
Thank you very much. WWF Azerbaijan, COP29 Communication Coordinator. Have you special program for urban wildlife? And maybe you already do this work, but capacity building trainings for your stakeholders and stimulating programs. If you can tell me about this, thank you very much.
Sure. One of the things that we do at FEMA is we do a lot of education and training in a whole number of areas. We have a National Disaster Emergency Management University that has, it had an Emergency Management Institute. We've recently added a School for National Resilience, Crisis Leadership School. And across those different areas, there's a lot of education on both nature-based solutions, risk reduction, emergency management, a whole number of things, because there is a need to, I think the point that was made, upskill folks in terms of how to really tackle the challenges at hand. And so education and training and capacity building is foundational to actually accomplishing the goals from our perspective.
So we have, I think, 3 initiatives that may be helpful. 2 are very simple. We are doing pollinator gardens all over the city. I think we've done 82 so far, and they're super easy. I mean, you just throw seeds in soil, and you kind of have to water them a little bit, but it works as a desert community. The wildflower game is awesome because it obviously leads to all sorts of other ecosystems, even as you get higher and higher up the food chain, because it's where even mammals will create habitats and the whole thing. So pollinator gardens has been the cheapest, easiest, fastest, most crowd-pleasing way to create some healthy ecosystems. But moving up a little bit, we are replanting our tree canopies. So we're adding 10,000 trees over the course of the next, it's been a 10-year program. But that tree canopy is really important, again, because of the shade that it creates for all sorts of habitat. You can work through sort of the whole food chain, from coyote all the way down to like what birds are eating out of the soil, like roadrunners, because that's our famous bird in New Mexico. So the tree canopy restoration program is very important. And the third thing is we actually institutionalize, we call it open space. We have, as part of our city bonding program, 3% of the funds go to literally buy land that we do nothing with. So all over our city, we have the most open space per capita of any city in America. And if you go to Albuquerque, you see these empty, we call them mesas, which is a Spanish term, but you just see an empty plot of land. And it's like, why is that there? That's our open space program. And so children, like when I grew up there, it's also our backyard. We just play in the open space. And there are coyotes there, and there are roadrunners and all sorts of other amazing things that we often take for granted in the desert. But it's all around us. So our city, if you think about in 3 zones on each ends of the valleys, we have open space that actually hems in development, because it is literally like a ring that you can't build through to get to the other side of the city limits. And then in the center of the city along the Rio Grande, we have open space on both sides, which has a forest on each side. So this program has been in place for 50 years, and it basically has lasted because it's institutionalized as part of the bond cycle, and it's a permanent fund. So I try and steal it all the time, and I can't. It can only be used for open space. And so politicians also can't mess it up.
Yeah, I'll just say that AI sort of nationally or globally, we have lots of resources for our members, but in terms of our connection to communities that really happens at the local level. So our 200 plus chapters, are really there at the forefront of connecting with, individual citizens. And so, different chapters have different levels of engagement, but I know in Chicago, where I live, there's a lot of engagement with, with the public, and in partnership with the related organization, Chicago Architecture Center. There's the Chicago Boat Tour, which is famous. If you go to Chicago, check out the boat tour of the city, but also the educational programs through AIA and other sort of related organizations to help, just bring awareness to, to issues around climate, but, the built environment in general. So that's how, our organization kind of directly interfaces with the public and engages community.
I'll also just add in that nature-based solutions are incredibly important for many of the hazards we've been talking about. You mentioned heat. We know that through our urban heat mapping campaigns that the areas that have the least green cover are the hottest areas in most cities. And so increasing green spaces can reduce heat. Green spaces are critical for flooding and drought protection. We find that oyster reefs, coral reefs, they provide huge support for coastal communities with storm surges that are protective for our coastal areas. And so over and over again, we find nature to be one of the most powerful engineering solutions we have. It's something that can be done on its own, or it can be partnered with the built infrastructure. And so these green infrastructure or green-gray infrastructure approaches are incredibly important solutions within the resilient space, and they also offer climate mitigation benefits in terms of storing and sequestering carbon. So they're really a tremendous win for so many reasons. So I appreciate that question, and just want to highlight the many, many benefits of nature-based solutions. With that, I'm going to let our panelists ask this is the speed round, okay? So, and then we're going to wrap it up for today. What is your one top need for climate resilience moving forward? What is the one thing that you want to highlight to this global audience as the one top resilience need? And we'll close our panel with the answer to that question.
I would say community-driven resilience planning so that everyone can really take action based on what communities are seeking to accomplish.
Well, I'm tempted to say money, so I'm not going to. I would actually say technology, because a lot of the technologies that we're all excited about just aren't quite there. We have major problems with electric buses. We have problems with electric charging because of battery life. A lot of the building code initiatives, the problem is the costs are higher for the technology that we want to use in materials, green concrete, things like this. So it's just a broad sense of saying, like, I can see hope and help on the way, but like right now the technology is either too expensive or not available enough. And so it's a little bit of a tease, and I think that's been a challenge for a lot of us.
So I will say money. I think it's for our projects, especially to kind of get ahead of the issues that we know are coming because climate change is real. I think there's a stat that for every dollar that you spend on prevention, we actually save $13. And so I think just funding projects at the level that they need to be funded and empowering architects to help provide those solutions and actually don't value engineer those mitigating measures out, I think is really important. So having the funding to really do the work that's necessary to ultimately save, not just money in the long run, but also lives and productivity.
All right, so with that, I'd like to thank our panelists for their excellent thoughts today. I'd like to thank the audience for your excellent questions and showing up, and thank our online viewers for your participation. It's really exciting to see these conversations about resilience taking place. There's so much that needs to be done, but also so many great examples. So thank you all.